The cargo hauler shuddered violently as another explosion ripped through the engine compartment. David Torres gripped the control panel with both hands while alarms screamed around him. The small ship called Dusty Roads was dying and taking him down with it. Through the viewport, the planet below grew larger by the second. It was an ugly brown thing with patches of dark green and gray clouds swirling across its surface. No name, just a designation on the star charts of 7744. Uninhabited, no rescue stations, no colonies, nothing. David punched buttons and yanked levers, trying to coax one more burst of power from the failing engines. The ship bucked like an angry animal. He had been hauling supplies through the outer fringe for 3 years without incident. 3 years of boring, safe runs. And now this. The atmosphere grabbed the ship and shook it hard. David's teeth rattled. The heat shields held, but the left stabilizer tore away with a metallic shriek. The ship began spinning. He fought the controls, managed to slow the rotation, but could not stop it completely. The ground rushed up fast. David saw a rocky canyon, a dry riverbed, scattered boulders. He aimed for the flattest spot he could find and prayed. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Metal screamed. Containers burst open in the cargo bay behind him. The ship skipped once, twice, then plowed through dirt and stone before finally sliding to a stop against a canyon wall. David hung in his harness, ears ringing, tasting blood. He touched his lip and his fingers came away red. Nothing serious. He checked his arms and legs. Everything moved, lucky. He unbuckled and stood on shaky legs. The cabin was a mess of loose equipment and flickering displays. The main computer was dead. The communication array showed red across the board. Destroyed on impact, but the emergency beacon light blinked green. That was something at least. David climbed out through the buckled airlock. The air outside was thin but breathable. Hot, dry. The twin suns hung low in an orange sky. He walked around the ship and surveyed the damage. The engine compartment was torn open like a gutted fish. Fuel lines hung loose. The hull had cracks running along multiple seams. He had spare parts in the cargo bay, but repairs would take weeks, maybe longer if he worked alone. The emergency beacon would send out a signal. Someone might pick it up. Might. The outer fringe was not exactly crowded with traffic. He could be here for days or months, or nobody would come at all. David retrieved his survival pack from the ship. Water purifier, medical kit, rations, tools, and a data pad. He needed to find water and set up some kind of shelter. The suns would set in a few hours. He was checking the area when he heard it. A sound that did not belong. Low and pained like wind through broken pipes. It came from deeper in the canyon. David followed the sound. His boots crunched on loose gravel. The canyon walls rose high on both sides, casting long shadows. The sound grew louder, not wind. Something alive. He rounded a bend and stopped. A creature lay pinned beneath a collapsed section of the canyon wall. It was huge, easily 20 feet from nose to tail. The body was covered in scales that shimmered with deep purple and blue colors even in the fading light. 4 legs, 2 massive wings folded awkwardly against its sides, and a long serpentine neck ending in a head with intelligent golden eyes. A dragon, or something very much like the dragons from old Earth stories. The creature saw David and made a sound that was part hiss, part whimper. Its front legs scrabbled weakly at the ground. The back half of its body was buried under tons of rock. Blood, darker than human blood, pooled around the stones. David approached slowly with his hands visible. The creature watched him with those golden eyes. It opened its mouth and a weak burst of superheated plasma shot out, dissipating a few feet away. A warning. Easy, David said softly. Easy. I am not here to hurt you. The creature made another sound, softer this time. Its eyes were filled with pain and something else. Fear. David knelt at a safe distance. He could see the extent of the damage now. The rocks had crushed the lower half of the creature's body. Its wings were torn. It could not move anything below its midsection. It had probably been trapped here for days based on the dried blood. The creature needed help. Serious help. Medical care beyond anything David could provide. Even if he could move the rocks, and that was a big if, the injuries were severe. He looked back toward his crashed ship. The emergency beacon was active. If rescue came, they would not wait around. They would grab him and leave. Standard protocol. No time for side trips or extra passengers, especially huge injured aliens of unknown species. David looked at the creature again. It was watching him with those intelligent eyes, waiting to see what he would do. He thought about the beacon, thought about rescue, thought about leaving this creature to die alone and in pain. Then he opened his survival pack and pulled out the water container. "All right," he said, moving closer. "Let us see what we can do." The creature did not attack as David approached. It watched him carefully. He held out the water and tilted the container toward its mouth. The creature hesitated, then opened its jaws. David poured slowly. The creature drank, its throat working. When the water was gone, it made a sound that might have been gratitude. David sat down on a rock near the creature's head. The suns were setting now, painting the canyon in shades of red and gold. His ship was damaged. His beacon was weak. Rescue might come or might not. And here was this creature, broken and trapped and utterly helpless. He should be focused on his own survival. That was the smart thing, the logical thing. But David had never been good at leaving people behind. Even if this person had scales and wings. "I guess we are both stuck here," he said to the creature. "Might as well stick together." The creature made a low rumbling sound and closed its eyes. Not in death, but in something like relief. David pulled his jacket tighter against the cooling air and began planning. Food, water, shelter, medical supplies, and somehow, some way he had to figure out how to move several tons of rock without killing the creature in the process. It was going to be a long night, and probably a longer few weeks, but he was not going anywhere. 3 days had passed since the crash. David had established a routine that kept them both alive. Wake before the suns rose. Check on the creature. Provide water. Return to the ship for supplies. Work on removing rocks, repeat. The creature had a name. At least David thought it did. On the second day, she had made a series of sounds that seemed deliberate. Flowing and musical like water over stones. David had tried to repeat it back, and she had made a gesture with her head that looked like a nod. He could not pronounce it properly with his human mouth, but the closest he could get sounded like Rainfall. So that was what he called her. Rainfall seemed to understand more than David had first realized. When he spoke to her, she tracked his words with her eyes. When he pointed at things, she looked. When he brought her food, she waited patiently for him to set it down rather than snatching it away. Intelligence. Clear and undeniable. David had rigged up a shelter using cargo tarps from his ship. The material stretched over a framework of metal poles created shade during the brutal daytime heat and protection from the cold nights. Rainfall's body was too large to cover completely, but he focused on keeping her head and upper body protected. Water was less of a problem than he had feared. The ship's recycling system still functioned. He had hauled it out of the wreckage and set it up near Rainfall's position. It pulled moisture from the air and purified it. Not fast but steady, enough for both of them if they were careful. Food was trickier. David had rations for himself, but Rainfall needed something else. He had tried offering her his protein bars. She had sniffed them and turned her head away with what looked like disgust. Fair enough. Through trial and error, David discovered she could eat certain local plants. There was a tough grass that grew in patches along the canyon floor. Rainfall had gestured toward it with her eyes and made encouraging sounds when David brought it close. She had eaten it eagerly. He had also found a type of cactus with purple flesh that she seemed to enjoy, so he spent part of each day gathering vegetation. The rocks were the biggest problem. David had been working for 3 days to move them and had barely made progress. The largest boulder pinning Rainfall's lower body weighed several tons. He had no equipment rated for that kind of load. What he did have was a hydraulic jack from the ship, some cable, and a lot of determination. He was working on the jack when Rainfall made a sound. David looked up. She was watching him with those golden eyes and making a series of gestures with her head, nodding toward the datapad on his belt, then toward herself. David pulled out the datapad. "This?" Rainfall made an affirmative sound. David moved closer and held up the device. Rainfall looked at it, then made more sounds. Different patterns, deliberate. David had an idea. He opened the translation program on the datapad. It was basic software meant for common galactic languages, but maybe it could find patterns in Rainfall's speech. He held up the datapad near her mouth. "Try again." Rainfall made a series of sounds. The datapad screen flickered with analysis. After a moment, text appeared. Language pattern recognized. "Shoral dialect, limited database available, Shoral," David said. "That is your species?" Rainfall made a sound the datapad translated as yes. David felt excitement surge through him. Can you understand me? Rainfall made another sound. The translation appeared, some words. Translator implant damaged. Understand more than speak. They spent the next hour establishing basic communication. Rainfall could understand Galactic Standard through her translator implant, even though it was damaged and not functioning fully. She could make herself understood through a combination of sounds, gestures, and the datapad's limited translation. David learned that Rainfall had been a stellar cartographer. She had been mapping the system when an asteroid storm had damaged her small scout ship. She had crashed weeks before David arrived. The impact had caused the canyon wall to collapse on top of her. She had been trapped ever since, slowly starving and losing hope. Why this planet? David asked. Rainfall's translated response came through. Old maps showed Shoral colony here. Long ago. Wanted to see homeworld of ancestors. There was a colony here. Thousands of years passed. Climate changed. They left. I came seeking history. Found only stones. The irony was brutal. She had come looking for her people's past and found a tomb instead. David sat down near her head. I am going to get you out of here. I do not know how yet, but I will figure it out. Rainfall made a sound without using the datapad. It was lower, sadder. She looked at David with those intelligent eyes and slowly blinked. A gesture of gratitude, he thought. Over the following days, they developed a rhythm. David would work on the rocks in the cooler morning hours. Rainfall would watch and sometimes make suggestions through the datapad. She understood physics and leverage better than he did. Her guidance helped him position the jack more effectively. In the afternoons, when the heat was too intense for physical labor, David would sit in the shade of the shelter and talk to Rainfall. He told her about Earth, about oceans and forests and cities, about his family and how he had ended up working on cargo haulers in the outer fringe. Rainfall told him about her life, about flying through nebulas and watching binary stars dance around each other, about the mathematics of orbital mechanics and the beauty of a perfectly calculated jump path. She described things in ways that made David see the universe differently. Not as empty space between destinations, but as something alive and musical. She told him that Shoral experienced the universe as harmonies. Each planet had a frequency, each star a tone. She could hear them even now, lying broken in the canyon. The planet sang a low rumbling note. The binary suns above created a chord that shifted throughout the day. David found himself listening more carefully to the world around them. The wind through the canyon, the creak of cooling rocks at night, the hum of his equipment. Maybe he could not hear what Rainfall heard, but he was starting to understand that he had been deaf to something important. On the seventh day, David managed to shift the largest boulder. It moved only a few inches, but those inches mattered. Rainfall felt sensation return to a small area of her lower back. She made a sound of surprise and hope. David collapsed beside the jack, exhausted and sweating. Rainfall reached out with her head and gently touched his shoulder with her snout. The gesture was clear even without translation. Thank you. Keep going. We can do this. The ship's computer chimed at dawn on the 15th day. David was adjusting Rainfall's shelter when he heard it. The sound meant only one thing. Incoming signal detected. He ran to the ship and checked the display. A rescue vessel had picked up his emergency beacon. They were 3 weeks out and closing. Standard protocol meant they would spend a few hours on planet, assess the situation, pick up survivors, and leave. No delays. No exceptions. David stared at the screen. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, someone would come for him. He would be saved. He could go home. He looked back toward the canyon where Rainfall waited. 3 weeks was not enough time. He had been working for over 2 weeks and had only managed to move a fraction of the rocks pinning her down. Even if he worked day and night, even if everything went perfectly, he could not free her in time. And even if he did, she would need months of recovery before she could travel. The rescue ship would not wait. They would not have room for a massive injured alien. They would take David and leave. He could go home. All he had to do was nothing. Just keep working slowly, let the rescue come, and leave. Rainfall would understand. She was intelligent. She knew how these things worked. David closed the computer display and walked back to the canyon. Rainfall was awake, watching him approach. She could read his moods now, and she tilted her head in question. Got a signal, David said, sitting down near her. Rescue ship. 3 weeks out. Rainfall went very still. Her eyes searched his face. The datapad lay between them, but she did not reach for it. I cannot get you free in 3 weeks, David continued. Even if I could, you would need time to heal before traveling. You know what that means. Rainfall finally used the datapad. The translation was simple. You will go. That is what I am supposed to do. You should go. You have stayed too long already. You have family, a life. You should return to it. David picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. The binary suns were rising, painting the canyon in shades of orange and pink. Rainfall had told him this planet sang a low note. He could almost hear it now. When I was 12, David said, my little brother fell through ice on a frozen lake. He was under the water, and I could see him through the ice, but I could not reach him. Everyone said to wait for help, said it was too dangerous to go out there. The ice would break and I would fall in too. Rainfall listened silently. I went anyway, crawled out on my belly and broke through the ice with a rock. Pulled him out. We were both freezing and could have died, but we did not. You know what my brother said to me years later? He said he knew I would come, said he was not scared because he knew I would not leave him. You are not obligated to save everyone you meet, Rainfall said through the datapad. No, but I am obligated to be the kind of person who tries. David stood and walked to where his tools lay. He picked up the hydraulic jack. 3 weeks. That is what we have. Let us see how much we can do. For the next 5 days, David worked harder than he had ever worked in his life. He barely slept. He moved rocks until his hands bled, then wrapped them and kept moving rocks. Rainfall protested, told him to rest, but he ignored her. On the 20th day, disaster struck. David was repositioning the jack when the cable snapped. The boulder he had been lifting shifted and crashed down. Not on Rainfall, but near her. The impact sent vibrations through the ground. Rainfall cried out in pain as rocks pressed against her injuries. David scrambled to assess the damage. He had made things worse. The boulder had settled into a new position that actually increased the pressure on Rainfall's spine. I am sorry, David said, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. I was trying to help and I just made it worse. Rainfall's breathing was labored. She was clearly in agony. But she reached out with her head and touched David's hand with her snout. The gesture was gentle. The datapad translated her words. You did not make anything worse. I was already broken. You gave me hope. That is more than I had. Hope is not enough. I need to actually help you. You have helped. You stayed. You tried. That matters. David sat down heavily. His hands were shaking. He was exhausted, frustrated, and running out of time. The rescue ship would arrive in less than 2 weeks. That night, he made a decision. While Rainfall slept, he went to his ship and accessed the emergency beacon controls. He stared at the switch for a long time. Then he flipped it. The beacon light turned from green to dark. Deactivated. When he returned to the canyon, Rainfall was awake. She had heard the ship's computer announce the beacon status change. She looked at him with wide eyes. What did you do? Turned it off. The rescue ship will not find you without the beacon signal. I know. David, you cannot stay here forever. You will run out of supplies. This planet is not safe for long-term survival. Then we better figure out a solution before that happens. Rainfall made a sound that was part distress, part anger. I am not worth your life. I am one Shoral cartographer. I have lived a good life. I have seen wonders. If I die here, I die having done meaningful work. But you are young. You have decades ahead of you, a family that loves you, dreams you have not fulfilled yet. And I will fulfill those dreams, David said calmly, but not by abandoning someone who needs help when I can provide it. That is not the person I want to be. That is not the life I want to live. You are a fool. Probably. But I am a fool who is staying. So you might as well help me figure out how to get you out from under these rocks. The rescue ship passed by the planet 9 days later. David and Rainfall watched the sky together, seeing the distant lights of the vessel's engines as it moved through the system. It did not stop. Without an active beacon, there was no reason to investigate. Rainfall wept. David sat beside her and said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had made his choice. They both had to live with it now. After the ship was gone, Rainfall finally spoke through the datapad. Why? Truly, why did you do this? David thought about his answer carefully. Because the universe is full of people who make the smart choice. The calculated choice. The safe choice. And those choices are fine. But someone has to make the other choice too. Someone has to say that one life matters more than convenience or protocol, or even self-preservation. You matter, Rainfall. Not because of what you have done or what you might do in the future. You matter because you are here and you are alive and you deserve help. That is enough. Rainfall closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had changed. A determination David had not seen before. Then we do this properly. No more trying to move rocks. We need a better solution. What do you suggest? I have been thinking. Shoral spines are not like human spines. They contain crystalline neural pathways. The damage is not tissue death. It is disrupted crystal matrix. With proper electromagnetic stimulation, the crystals might realign. David felt hope spark in his chest. What do you need? Equipment we do not have. But you are a mechanic. You build things. I am a scientist. I understand theory. Together maybe we can create what we need. They worked through the night planning and calculating. For the first time since the crash, David felt like they had a real chance. Not to free Rainfall from the rocks, but to heal her while she was still trapped. To give her body time to repair itself, it would take months, maybe longer. But they had time now. All the time they needed because David had made sure of it. 2 months had passed since David deactivated the beacon. The canyon had become their home in ways neither of them had expected. David had expanded the shelter system, creating a more permanent structure that protected them from the increasingly violent weather patterns. Rainfall had been right about the climate. This planet was not stable. The electromagnetic therapy device sat beside Rainfall's body, humming quietly. David had built it from salvaged ship components, following Rainfall's detailed instructions. It looked like a mess of wires and circuits, but it worked. The device sent precise electromagnetic pulses through Rainfall's spine, encouraging her crystalline neural pathways to realign and reconnect. Progress was slow, but measurable. Rainfall had regained feeling in her entire mid-spine region. She could flex muscles she had not accessed in months. Her tail, once completely dead, could now curl and move with deliberate control. The improvement was remarkable given where they had started. David sat cross-legged near Rainfall's head, eating a protein bar while she munched on the purple cactus he had gathered earlier. They had fallen into comfortable silence. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the easy quiet of people who knew each other well enough that words were optional. Tell me about your family, Rainfall said through the data pad. Her galactic standard was improving. The translator implant had healed somewhat, functioning better with each passing week. You have heard all my stories already. Tell me again. I like hearing them, David smiled. They had this conversation often. Rainfall seemed to enjoy hearing about his family repeatedly, finding new details in each retelling. He suspected she was homesick for her own people even if she never said so. My mother is a teacher, history. She can make the most boring historical event sound like an adventure. My father is a construction foreman, builds things with his hands like I do. I get that from him. My brother, the one I pulled from the ice, he is a doctor now, says I inspired him to help people. And they think you are dead. David's smile faded. That was the hard part. His family had no way of knowing he was alive. The rescue ship had reported finding no survivor at the beacon location. He had been declared lost. His family was mourning him right now while he sat in a canyon eating protein bars with a dragon. They will know eventually. When we get out of here, they will know. When? Not if. When? David confirmed. Rainfall made a sound that was becoming familiar, her version of a laugh. It was a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. David had learned to recognize her emotions through these sounds. Happiness, sadness, pain, amusement. She was as expressive as any human once you knew how to read her. The therapy device chimed. Treatment cycle complete. David stood and checked the readings. Everything looked good. Rainfall's neural response was improving steadily. At this rate, she might regain function in her hind legs within another few months. How does it feel? David asked. Like small lightning inside my body. Not painful. Strange, but good strange. David began his daily examination of her lower body. He had removed enough rocks over the months that he could access more of her. Her scales were growing back where they had been torn. The color was lighter in those areas, new growth, but it was growth. Her body was healing. He noticed her watching him work. What? You are gentle. Most beings would be afraid to touch a shoral. We are large, dangerous. Our plasma breath can melt metal. You have never used it on me. I thought about it. That first day when you approached, I was terrified. Thought you might be Predator. Thought you would hurt me while I could not defend myself. David paused. But you did not actually attack me. No, I saw your eyes. They were kind, concerned. I did not understand at first. Why would a stranger care? But you did. You cared before you knew anything about me, before you knew my species or my name or whether I could even communicate. You were hurt and needed help. That was all I needed to know. Rainfall was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she had never said before. In Shoral culture, we have a term, wing brother. It refers to one who carries you when you cannot fly. It is sacred bond, rare. Most Shoral never form such bond, even with other Shoral. But you are my wing brother, David Torres. You have carried me when I could not fly. David felt emotion tighten his throat. He sat down and placed his hand on her scaled head. She leaned into the touch. You are my friend, Rainfall. That is what we call it in human culture. Friend. It means someone you choose to stand beside, someone whose life matters to you. Friend, Rainfall repeated, testing the word. Yes, you are my friend. They sat together as the sun set. David had learned to appreciate the beauty of this harsh planet. The way the light painted the canyon walls, the sound of wind carrying sand, the distant thunder of storms that never quite reached them. Rainfall was right. Everything did have a frequency, a note, and maybe David was starting to hear it too. That night brought muscle spasms. Rainfall's body had been experiencing them more frequently as her nerves reconnected. David had learned to recognize the signs. Her breathing would change, becoming rapid and shallow. Her eyes would go wide. Then the spasms would hit, violent and painful. David moved quickly, positioning himself near her head. He had developed a technique over the weeks. He would place his hands on specific pressure points near her jaw and speak in a calm, steady voice. It did not stop the spasms, but it helped her manage the pain. Breathe with me, David said. In, out, in, out. You are all right. I am here. It will pass. Rainfall's body convulsed. Her tail thrashed. But her eyes stayed locked on David's face, using him as an anchor against the pain. The spasm lasted 3 minutes. They felt like hours. When it finally ended, Rainfall went limp, exhausted. I am sorry, she whispered through the datapad. For what? For being burden. For causing you pain watching me suffer. You are not a burden, and your pain does not hurt me. What would hurt is leaving you alone in it. Rainfall's eyes grew wet. Shorel could cry, David had learned. Not often, but when emotions overwhelmed them. He gently wiped the tears away with his sleeve. Pain means healing, Rainfall said. You taught me that. If I feel pain, it means nerves are reconnecting. Means I am getting better. Exactly. And every day you are stronger than the day before. After Rainfall fell asleep, David sat watching over her. He thought about his family, about his old life hauling cargo through space. That life seemed distant now, like it had belonged to someone else. This was his life now, this canyon, this planet, this remarkable being who had become the most important person in his world. He did not regret his choice, not even for a moment. Somewhere above them, stars were being born and dying. Galaxies were spinning. And here in this small canyon on an unnamed planet, a human and a Shoral were proving that sometimes the most important thing in the universe was simply refusing to leave someone behind. 4 months into their partnership, supplies became critical. David had been rationing carefully, but his protein bars were down to a dozen. The ship's water recycler was showing signs of failure. Spare parts were running out. They needed more resources or they would not survive another month. David studied his datapad's mapping function. When he had first crashed, he had spotted something in the distance during his descent. Another wreckage site, maybe 10 miles away across rough terrain. He had been too focused on Rainfall to investigate before. Now he had no choice. I need to go on an expedition, David told Rainfall over breakfast. 3 days, maybe 4. There is another crash site I saw when I came down. Might have supplies we can use. Rainfall's eyes went wide. No, too dangerous. You could get hurt. Get lost. I will be careful, and I will take the communicator. We can stay in contact, David. I cannot protect you if something happens. I cannot help you. I am still trapped here. He knelt beside her head. I know, but I am not asking permission. I am telling you the plan so you do not worry. We need supplies. This is the only option. Rainfall made a distressed sound. What if you do not come back? Then you keep doing the therapy treatments without me. You keep healing. And when you can move again, you find a way to signal for help. But I will come back. I promise. Humans make promises they cannot guarantee. Yes, but I keep mine. David spent the rest of the day preparing. He packed light but smart. Water purification tablets, medical kit, tools, rope, and the communicator. He left detailed instructions for Rainfall on how to operate the therapy device manually if needed. He cached extra food and water within her reach. Before dawn on the second day, he set out. Rainfall watched him go, her eyes reflecting the early light. David looked back once and raised his hand. She lifted her head in acknowledgement. The terrain was brutal. Sharp rocks, loose sand, steep climbs. David's body ached within hours. But he pushed forward, driven by necessity and the image of Rainfall waiting for him. On the second day, he reached the crash site. It was an old vessel, much older than his ship. The design was unfamiliar. David approached carefully, looking for radiation warnings or hazardous material indicators. The hull was intact enough to suggest a controlled landing rather than a catastrophic crash. The airlock was unsealed. David entered with his light activated. Inside, dust covered everything. The ship had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. But it was intact, and as David explored deeper, he realized what he had found. This was a Shoral vessel. The design was elegant, flowing, everything curved and organic. David found sleeping quarters sized for creatures much larger than humans. He found a navigation room with star charts still displayed on dormant screens. And in the back he found something that made his heart race, a medical bay, complete with equipment designed specifically for Shoral physiology. David's hands shook as he examined the technology. Most of it was offline, but the components looked intact. There was a regeneration pod, specialized scanning equipment, and supply lockers filled with medical tools and medications. He activated his communicator. Rainfall. You there? Static, then her voice came through, translated by the datapad. David, are you safe? I am safe. And Rainfall, I found something. I found a Shoral ship, an old colony ship based on the size. It has medical equipment. Equipment designed for your species. Silence on the other end. Then the colony. The one I came looking for. You found their ship? Yes. And there is a regeneration pod here. If I can get it working, if I can bring you to it, this could heal you completely. Not months of therapy. Real healing. David, that equipment is ancient. It might not work, and even if it does, I cannot be moved. We established this. Moving me could kill me. David looked at the pod. It was large, designed to hold a full-sized Shoral. The technology was dormant but intact. Let me worry about the details. I'm going to figure this out. He spent 2 days examining the ship and its systems. The main power core was dead, but the backup systems could be activated. David had the technical knowledge to do it. The regeneration pod required specific power inputs that his damaged ship could not provide, but this ship's systems could manage it if restored. The problem was getting Rainfall here. 10 miles of rough terrain with a paralyzed Shoral who weighed several tons. Impossible under normal circumstances. But David had never been good at accepting impossible. He began cataloging components he could salvage. Lightweight alloys for building a transport platform. Cables and pulleys for creating a hauling system. Power cells that could be recharged from solar collectors. It would take weeks to prepare, but it could be done. On his way back to Rainfall, David carried as many supplies as he could manage. Medical equipment, power cells, tools, and several containers of food supplies designed for Shoral biology that had been preserved in stasis lockers. When he finally made it back to the canyon, Rainfall was waiting anxiously. She made a sound of relief when she saw him. You came back. I told you I would, and I brought supplies. Real Shoral food, not just cactus and grass. David showed her what he had found. He described the ship, the medical bay, the regeneration pod. He explained his idea for transporting her across the terrain. It is too dangerous, Rainfall said. Too many things could go wrong. Maybe. But right now we are slowly running out of resources and time. This gives us a real chance. A chance for you to actually heal. To fly again. I do not need to fly. I need you to survive. We both survive. Together. That is the only acceptable outcome. Rainfall studied him for a long moment. You have changed since we met. When you crashed here, you were practical mechanic, careful and cautious. Now you make impossible plans and take enormous risks. You changed me. Caring about someone changes what is possible. And you changed me, Rainfall said quietly. I thought I understood what mattered. Mapping stars, recording data, accomplishing goals. But you taught me that sometimes one life matters more than any goal, that staying matters more than achieving. David smiled. So we agree then. We try this. We get you to that ship. We use the regeneration pod, and we both walk away from this planet alive and whole. Walk, fly, whatever works, they spent the evening planning. Rainfall contributed her understanding of physics and engineering. David provided practical mechanical knowledge. Together they designed a transport system that might actually work. It would be the most difficult thing either of them had ever attempted. Dangerous, exhausting, potentially fatal if anything went wrong. But they were going to do it anyway, because that was what Wing brothers did. They carried each other, no matter how impossible the journey seemed. 6 weeks of preparation. David had made 4 more trips to the old colony ship, each time bringing back components. He had built a transport sledge using lightweight alloy frames and salvaged anti-gravity plates. The plates were weak, designed for cargo containers, not multi-ton aliens, but they would reduce Rainfall's weight enough to make moving her possible. The journey would take at least 5 days across harsh terrain. They had planned the route carefully, identifying rest stops where David could recharge the anti-gravity plates using solar collectors. Rainfall had regained enough strength to support her own head and upper body now, which would help with balance during transport. The day of departure arrived. David had carefully removed the remaining rocks from Rainfall's body. Her lower half was still paralyzed, but free. They had wrapped her in protective padding and secured her to the sledge with carefully positioned straps that would not aggravate her injuries. Last chance to tell me this is a terrible idea, David said as he made final adjustments. It is a terrible idea. We are doing it anyway. The first day was brutal. David pulled the sledge using a harness system he had designed. The anti-gravity plates reduced Rainfall's weight significantly, but she still massed enough that moving her required all of his strength. The terrain fought him at every meter. Loose sand, sharp rocks, steep inclines. Rainfall guided him using her improved vantage point to spot better paths. They communicated constantly. When David needed to rest, Rainfall would tell him stories about the stars she had mapped. When Rainfall's old injuries ached from the movement, David would adjust her position and check her vital signs. They made camp the first night in the shelter of a rock formation. David collapsed from exhaustion. Rainfall watched over him while he slept, keeping alert for any dangers. This was the first time she had been able to protect him instead of being protected. It felt important. Day 2 brought a sandstorm. David had to secure the sledge and create emergency shelter for them both. They huddled together. David pressed against Rainfall's side for warmth and stability while wind screamed around them. The storm lasted 6 hours. When it finally passed, they found that sand had damaged one of the anti-gravity plates. David spent 3 hours making repairs with limited tools and supplies. Rainfall talked him through the more complex technical aspects, her scientific knowledge proving invaluable. We make a good team, David said as he finished the repair. We always did. I just could not help much before. You helped every day. You gave me a reason to keep going. By day 4, they had covered 8 miles. David's body was breaking down. His hands were covered in blisters that had burst and scabbed over. His shoulders ached from the harness. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment. But the colony ship was visible on the horizon now, close enough to feel real. Rainfall had grown quiet. David noticed and asked what was wrong. I'm afraid, she admitted. What if the regeneration pod does not work? What if we came all this way for nothing? Then we try something else. But we are not giving up. Not after coming this far. On the 5th day, they reached the colony ship. David pulled the sledge up the entry ramp and into the medical bay. He had prepared everything during his previous visits. The backup power was online. The regeneration pod was ready. All that remained was getting Rainfall inside it. With careful maneuvering and the anti-gravity sledge, they managed it. Rainfall settled into the pod, which adjusted to her body shape. David checked all the connections and settings 3 times. The pod will put you into deep sleep while it works, David explained. The process takes about 4 weeks. I will be here the whole time monitoring everything. David, what if something goes wrong? What if I do not wake up? He took her large head in his hands and pressed his forehead against her scaled snout. You are going to wake up. You are going to heal. And then you are going to fly again. I did not come this far to lose you now. Promise. Promise. The pod closed. Rainfall's eyes stayed on David's face until the last moment. Then the regeneration cycle began. 4 weeks felt like 4 years. David maintained the ship's systems, monitored Rainfall's progress, and tried not to go insane with worry. The pod's readouts showed good progress. Her crystalline neural pathways were reorganizing properly. Her damaged tissue was regenerating. Her wings were healing, but she was not awake. She was somewhere in between living and sleeping, her body doing the impossible work of putting itself back together. David talked to her every day, even though she could not hear him. He told her about his plans for after they got off this planet. He told her stories about Earth. He told her that he was proud of her for being so strong. On day 28, the pod cycle completed. The lid opened slowly. Rainfall's eyes fluttered. David held his breath. She moved. First her head lifting slightly, then her front legs flexing, then impossibly her hind legs. She shifted her weight, testing her body. Her tail curled. Her wings extended, stretching out to their full span for the first time in almost 8 months. Rainfall made a sound, not of pain but of joy, pure undiluted joy. She climbed out of the pod slowly, testing each movement. Her legs shook slightly but held her weight. She took one step, then another. Then she looked at David with those golden eyes and spoke through the translator that now worked perfectly. I can feel everything. I can move. David, you did it. You actually did it. David could not speak. Emotion had overwhelmed his voice. He just nodded and smiled with tears running down his face. Rainfall moved closer and very gently wrapped her neck around him. A choral embrace. David hugged her back as best he could, his arms barely reaching a fraction of the way around her. They stood like that for a long time. Two beings from different worlds who had saved each other in ways that went far beyond the physical. Eventually, they activated the colony ship's communication array. It was powerful enough to send a signal that would reach civilized space. Help would come within weeks. While they waited, Rainfall tested her body. She walked, she ran, and finally, on a clear day with both suns high overhead, she spread her wings and launched herself into the air. David watched from the ground as she soared above the planet. She flew in great sweeping circles, her wings catching the light. She made sounds of pure happiness that echoed across the canyon. She was flying. After everything, she was flying. When she landed beside David, she was breathing hard but grinning in the way that Choral grinned with their eyes. Thank you, she said. For everything. For staying. For not giving up. For teaching me that sometimes one person can change everything. You taught me that too, David replied. I was just a mechanic hauling cargo. You gave me something worth staying for. The rescue ship arrived 3 weeks later. The crew was stunned to find a human and a Choral living together in an ancient colony ship. They were even more stunned when they heard the full story. Rainfall refused to be separated from David during the journey back to civilization. She made it clear that where he went, she went. They were wing siblings now. That bond could not be broken by distance or species or anything else. News of their story spread quickly through galactic channels. The human who had sacrificed rescue to save a Choral. The Choral who had learned to trust a human completely. It became more than just a story of survival. It became proof that compassion could bridge any divide. David's family wept when they saw him again. His brother hugged him and said he should have known David would survive. That was what David did. He survived and he helped others survive too. Rainfall met David's family and told them that their son had saved her life in every way that mattered. Not just physically, but spiritually. He had given her hope when she had none. They were offered many opportunities after their rescue. Speaking engagements, research positions, diplomatic roles. But they chose to work together as interspecies liaisons, helping facilitate understanding between humans and Choral. Sometimes they returned to OF 7744, to the canyon where their friendship had begun. They would stand together looking at the stars and remember what they had learned, that staying is sometimes braver than leaving. That one life is always worth saving. That family is not about biology but about choice. And that sometimes, the most important thing in the entire universe is simply refusing to abandon someone who needs you. Rainfall would fly above the planet while David watched from below. And every time she landed beside him, she would say the same thing. "Thank you for giving me back the sky." And every time, David would reply the same way. "Thank you for giving me a reason to look up at it."